You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network.
This is Rod Mahood, your in-game voice of the Niagara IceDogs, and you're listening to the Dog Pound Podcast on the Armchair GM Sports Network, your podcast source for all game analysis, team interviews, and up-to-date news regarding the Niagara IceDogs.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another installment of the Dog Pound Podcast, the official podcast of your Niagara IceDogs, right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network. You can find us on social media for updates, giveaways, and more by following the podcast on Twitter at Dog Pound Podcast, as well as TikTok. You can follow the network itself at Armchair GM Pod and on Facebook and Instagram by searching the Armchair GM Sports Network. You can find us on demand or wherever you're getting your audio podcasts, including Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, CastBox, and Deezer by searching the Armchair GM Sports Network. Also, you can see here in video form on YouTube. If you're enjoying the video version of the podcast, make sure to give us some love, like, subscribe, and smash that bell icon to stay up to date with all new video content that gets released on our YouTube channel. And lastly, check out our beautiful user-friendly website, armchairgmsports.com, for all things regarding the network. And now we are on NiagaraIceDogs.net under the media tab, where you'll find all of our Dog Pound Podcast content on the official site of the Niagara IceDogs. As always, I'm your host of the Dog Pound Podcast. My name is Brandon Caputo. You can follow me on Twitter at Capoots13_AGM, and I am not joined by my usual co-host today. We will get to that in a minute. Well, it's been a quite the week and a half, 2 weeks since we last recorded, and as you can probably tell, I'm still not able to shake whatever little bug I came down with this week, but Kyle is definitely in a lot worse shape than I am. We wish him well in his recovery from his sickness this week. But with that said, I'm very pleased to be joined today by a special guest co-host, and he's the one that wants to remain faceless. It's kind of fitting that we have him on radio, because he is the radio play-by-play voice of your Niagara IceDogs since its inception, basically, in 2007, 2008. Pleased to be joined today by the great Ted Lehman. Ted, thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So, Ted, we can talk about the history of the IceDogs coming on to the 15th year of the franchise. We'll probably be doing some segments with Ted throughout the year about the history, because he just got an encyclopedia of this team that I sure as heck can't remember as still a young tyke coming to these games as an IceDogs fan back in the day. But thanks for coming on today, Ted. And it's been an interesting preseason so far for the Niagara IceDogs, and We've been joking off air that they definitely want to stay in the spotlight with at least making a move almost every single day, it seems here.
Well, I was kidding with Assistant General Manager Wes Consorti. I left him a message on his phone, and I said, I'm going to be nice to you because I don't want to get traded, because on a daily basis, and Wes was laughing when I got a hold of him, I said, have you guys gone one day? Now they have. But have you guys one day without making some kind of move and some kind of acquisition that if you look at what they've done, has made the team better? And, Darren DeDobler, he's got a plan. And you can't do this plan in a vacuum. You can't do it without some kind of information. And I look forward to longer conversations with the IceDogs owner and GM just to talk about the art of the trade. Because to have, pulled off what he pulled off, it tells me that while his name was rumored during last year's season, he was around. We might not have known he was around. He was around. There is no way anybody makes all the moves he made without having the knowledge to make the moves. You can't make them off numbers. You got to know the people. And he came into this one running, and the proof's in the pudding with the way the team looks going into the regular season.
Yeah, we talked about some of the trades the IceDogs have made over the years, and you look back at, one of the more iconic trades for the Niagara Ice Dogs in the same similar situation with Sam Dickinson not wanting to report to the Ice Dogs. You look back at Lucas Lessio and the amount of draft picks that the Niagara Ice Dogs and then at the time GM Dave Brown were able to pull off to be able to bring some key assets back for Niagara that ended up becoming huge parts of their 2012 Eastern Conference Championship run.
Well, that happened with the 2009 draft, and as you go through the history, 2007 was Andrew Agozzino, Alex Friesen, both five-year Ice Dogs, the latter being local boy makes good, and then a year later, they end up picking up Freddie Hamilton as a first-rounder, building. In 2009, they got Dougie Hamilton as an early second-round pick. And in the first round, and fully intending to do exactly what he did, GM Dave Brown got Lucas Lessio and knew he wasn't going to report, but knew the rules, knew about the defected player, that you end up getting a compensatory pick the following year, one below where you picked that year. And that's an important thing to remember, because if you look at the situation now with Sam Dickinson, the Ice Dogs are slated, no matter how great they do, to pick number 5. So even if they're middle of the pack, they're going to pick at 5 and 10. There's no reason to believe they're going to be picking 1 through 4 and then getting number 5 as well. The Kitchener Rangers have recently done the same thing with their first pick, didn't nearly get the assets. And you look at the difference of the two trades, the one for Lucas Lessio, there were conditions here and conditions there. If he played so many games, if he did this, if he was around the league for so many years, there are no conditions. Just 7 picks came back to the Ice Dogs for Sam Dickinson. That's an incredible haul. So I look at it as a lot of draft picks got moved to make the Ice Dogs better immediately, and draft picks and resources are coming back to make the Ice Dogs better down the line. And when they're ready to make a run, have the assets, to be able to take the team over the top.
See, this is why we bring you on, Ted, to be able to cover me when I have, a couple of hiccups here as I'm still, again, recovering. But you make great points, and you look at the Sam Dickinson trade. So we're joined once again, if you're listening, by the radio play-by-play voice of the Niagara Ice Dogs for Giant FM, Ted Lehman. And we'll get into the trades later on today. We're going to talk about just general thoughts on the preseason. So let's get into the trades. So we didn't, when we had recorded our training camp episode, the trade ended up happening later that day. So unfortunately, we didn't really get to react about it. So now we'll kind of react about it now. So obviously, Niagara drafted Sam Dickinson 4th overall in the 2022 OHL draft. Didn't end up wanting to report. Basically, the statement from GM Darren DeDobler: "We had no intentions of trading Sam Dickinson when we drafted him. He was the best player available. We were unable to secure a meeting from his representation and family to convince him to report the camp. After an aggressive offer from London, we thought this was the best move for our organization moving forward and for the years to come, and they definitely took advantage of London really wanting Sam Dickinson on their defense, because they ended up acquiring 3 second-round picks, 3 third-round picks, and a 5th-round pick. Ted, your thoughts on that trade?
Well, first of all, I want to talk about what's going on here and the power in the OHL level. We know it's there at the pro level, but the power at the pro level, the players/agents have. The fact that this young guy had no intention of coming to Niagara and probably had a destination picked out where he wanted to go. There's potholes there that have always bothered me. If this becomes a league simply of recruiting, if the players decide on a regular basis, no matter where they're picked, hey, I want to go play for that team, I think this is my best road to the NHL. And I laugh about that on a regular basis, because I talk a lot to young parents, even players of Ice Dogs players. I talk to players and parents of kids that are in Bantam and Midget, and they're playing at different levels. And I say, if you've got talent, they're going to find you. The NHL will find you if you're on the first place team or the 20th place team. So that part of it kind of bothers me in terms of what's going on. Now, what was Darren DeDobler able to accomplish? And I'm going to go on record and say this right now, because I got in trouble with Lucas Lessio for years because I had a lot of fun calling him you-know-who at the Jack, because every time he touched the puck, clearly on the air, you could hear him being booed. And I started by saying, folks, don't be booing this young guy. He helped make your team. Lucas Lesio is one of the reasons, in addition to that Dave Brown trade, why the IceDogs won the Eastern Conference in 2012. We may be saluting Sam Dickinson in exactly the same way. Hey, Sam, love you. Picked you number 4. Would have loved to have seen you in an IceDogs uniform. You chose not to? Great. We got 7 players for you. This is how something gets built. So I'll say it now. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, don't waste your booze on this young guy. It's not going to affect him. Yeah, maybe it's fun. But, don't let it bother you because he has helped build your team the same way a defecting player in 2009 built the IceDogs of now 10 years ago.
And unfortunately, this isn't the first time, and it won't be the last that this happens.
Oh, yeah.
We've seen players over the years. Connor McDavid said that, he would have reported anywhere because he feels like it's a draft for a reason, and it's the integrity of the league. You're not putting yourself above the league. But then you have some other players that we've seen with guys like Adam Fantilli or Timothy Liljegren that were drafted by teams that they ended up not reporting to, that it happens, and
go back.
Have to move on.
IceDogs minority owner reported to Sault Ste. Marie. He lived in Brantford. Well-known story. He was in tears playing at the World Juniors in Montreal because he was homesick for his family. The greatest point getter of all time. I always get into the debate about Bobby Orr, so I don't say that. But greatest point getter of all time went where he was drafted. Now, enter Eric Lindros. I'm not going to Sault Ste. Marie, so Eric Lindros was too good to go to a team with a great pedigree and a great history. He forced a trade. But you're right, Connor McDavid. I remember when Dylan Strome was being drafted, and his mom and dad were absolutely great people to deal with, and I saw him in Oshawa during a playoff run, and I said, so, is Dylan going to announce he wants to come to Niagara? And Mom and Dad were emphatic. We're not going to jerry-rig. We're not going to hold the OHL hostage and say our boy has to play on this team. So there's different ways of looking at it, but again, I don't know that Sam Dickinson needs to be in London to get what he wants. Now, let me talk about Sam Dickinson for a second. We're going to talk about the IceDogs this year. Never saw him play. When you've got Rebo and Cato and Jesus and Denizio, is there the potential that Sam Dickinson would have started on pair number 3? Maybe. I don't know London's situation. Don't know if promises were made. But maybe that was part of the equation. They weren't talking to this team, especially after the trades were made. Writing's on the wall. I don't care who you are coming into this league. Even a Connor McDavid, you still have to pay your dues, and you got to get your feet wet, and you got to get into the OHL speed. It's light years from this league to the NHL, and I've heard players, nobody else but players tell me, it's light years from minor midget coming in. We can't call it that anymore, right? Okay, but
I know
that's how I think of it. But coming into the OHL, so you still have to, I don't care how great you are, you have to figure out the new league you're playing in.
Who would have thought that maybe he would have got a top 4 spot in this team? But like you mentioned, with the 4 defensemen that they had right now, I don't think that was a guarantee. And who knows what London's going to do? But like you said, if they're a good player, they'll find you anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're playing for the London Knights or, I don't know, the Pelham Panthers.
Right.
But no disrespect to the
Junior
Pelham
B
Panthers.
Players have been drafted to the NHL before, and there's famous one, Riley Sheehan, locally. Never played a face-off in the OHL. He got drafted to the show. They're going to find you. So it's one of those things. It's for years I lived in a AA center. And I lived in a AA center where we found ourselves with 12-year-olds in the playoffs playing against St. Thomas. And who's on the other side at AA? Joe Thornton. Now, did it hurt Joe Thornton not to be traipsed all over the province and play AAA from the time he could get out of diapers? I don't think so.
No, it clearly didn't, because he ended up being the first overall pick anyway in the NHL draft. But yeah, Sam Dickinson will not be a Niagara IceDog, but the IceDogs were able to secure some assets for him. And moving on to another trade with the London Knights, and we were wondering why we saw the London Brass at the first preseason game against Windsor and Port Colborne was kind of interesting.
It's a lesson for younger people who want to start covering this league, and I laugh about it all the time because, and you and I both know these kind of people, they're going to be the insiders, they're going to trap the guys at the top, they're going to get them into some kind of gotcha moment. No, you're not. I had longest conversation of my career with Mark Hunter, and I had no clue there was any trade coming up. And I just said, Mark, what in heaven's name are you doing in Port Colborne Arena, at the Valet Center on Labor Day Monday. And he put his tap shoes on, as it turned out, and said, well, we know both of these teams have extra players, and we need to look at what's going on. Nah. I mean, there was contacts being made, and all of a sudden, Owen Flores for 2 picks becomes an Ice Dog.
Yep, the Ice Dogs traded away a 2nd-round pick and a 5th-round pick for Owen Flores, the Illinois-born goaltender. 6th-round pick for the London Knights, 116th overall in 2020, started 23 games, posting a 3.75 goals against and an .875 save percentage. I know the fans out there are a little bit cautious and they don't really understand this trade as far as giving back a 2nd and a 5th to the London Knights for what looks to be either a 2nd or 3rd goaltender on this team. Ted, your thoughts on just acquiring this player for those 2 picks and what they're going to do in net with the 3 goaltenders from your perspective right now?
Well, let's talk about the first game he played in Port Colborne. And what we saw, when necessary, spectacular. The rest of the time, amazingly efficient. And the 2 goaltenders that are already here, and Josh Rosenzweig and Joey Costanzo, have got to transition, we hope this year, from incredibly heroic, spectacular, walking on water goaltenders to technically perfect and being there and making sure they make the stops they have to make and being spectacular when they're called upon. I want to talk about the picks because if you look at it and you're a casual observer, you go, wait a minute, they traded a 2nd and a 5th for a 6th-rounder. Well, let's talk about goaltenders. Many general managers in the OHL have given me the same phrase. You can always find a goaltender. And the Ice Dogs have done it over the years. They've made trades. When they brought in Alex Nedeljkovic, he was being supplanted in Flint. When they brought Jeremy Smith in from Michigan, he wasn't the starting goaltender there. Jeremy Smith helped engineer an upset over a higher-ranked Ottawa 67s team, almost called them the Senators, many years ago. Nedeljkovic took them all the way through 2016. So forget about where they get picked, because a lot of general managers shy away from going very high with goaltenders, because if they disappoint, you've lost a lot of hockey games and you lost a really great resource in a high draft pick who doesn't come through for you. So goaltenders don't seem to get that kind of notice. So value, if we're talking about it, changes between what round they were picked in. I mean, Dylan Rubrick got moved, and basically in terms of his value for this team, potentially as a non-top 6 forward, going on to another team, yeah, he was picked in higher rounds. There's another thing to consider. These players develop at their own pace. Jordan Maleta, great example, a 1st-rounder for the Windsor Spitfires, local boy, comes back to the Ice Dogs. He figures it out, as then coach and GM Marty Williamson said, and he became a very important piece for the Ice Dogs. He worked that into a contract. It looked like he was a bust. And by the time he was finished, he got to play at the next level. So the trade, are they going to be using 3 goaltenders? Are they going to be using 2 of the goaltenders? One of them is in a draft year. I can't answer that question. I'm sure in the future, either you or I are going to talk to the man who's going to answer the question. And right now, all they're looking for is kind of depth in that situation. The thing the casual fan has to remember, and I've been there for over 1,000 games, I'm not in the room. I'm not invited into the room. I don't want to be in the room. That's not what I want to get into. So we don't even know what's going on as far as the other 2 goaltenders are concerned. Haven't got a clue.
We don't know.
Flores might be a necessity when right now we think it's a luxury.
And you quickly mentioned it. We were looking to add some depth and strength to this important position. We're excited to have Owen in Niagara, stated General Manager Darren DeDobler. So nothing that's going to be groundbreaking with that announcement, but interesting.
I love those flat GM announcements. Darren has gotten very good at those. They just, basically, here you go. This is what I'm saying. It beats no comment.
The longtime radio voice of the Niagara Ice Dogs, Ted Lehman, joins us on the program today. Ted, you quickly mentioned it in your last comments there. We'll move on from the London Knights trades that Niagara made, because we know how we feel about the London Knights around these parts. But kind of going along with a former London junior Knight in Dylan Rubrick that was selected in the 3rd round by the Ice Dogs in 2020. 45th overall, was dealt to the Oshawa Generals last week. joining former Ice Dog Cameron Butler with the Generals. And they acquired a 8th round pick from the Oshawa Generals in 2024. Ted, again, like you mentioned, 3rd round pick goes for an 8th round pick, but I don't even know if he was going to be a top 9 forward on this team with the way that with the amount of moves that they had made during the offseason and the competitiveness that's going to be in this top 9 forward group. He most likely would have been a fourth line player at this point, in my opinion. But Dylan Rubrick, we always said that he was a polarizing figure here in Niagara because he had the size to be a dominant power forward in this league. More of a perimeter player and really didn't round out that physical aspect of his game that really probably would have made him an NHL draft pick, in my opinion, because you can't teach size like that, Ted, and I know that as somebody who's a perennial 5'7" man that wasn't given genes like
vertically
like this kid.
Challenged.
Exactly. So Dylan Rubrick.
Yeah, but I want to make a comment on what you just said. Everybody talked about his physical size. He had physical height, but God right now hasn't blessed him with the body, which he may get one day. This is a player that might end up playing at the next level, but he ended up constantly going up instead of out as well. And Dylan Rubrick, great young guy. I have nothing bad to say about him and the effort he put out last year. He was given opportunities, to your point, on the power play, and maybe he was miscast. He was basically the slot player who is expected to either not get hit by their shots by the point or try and deflect them or get those garbage goals, maybe miscast. Maybe that's where he, didn't need to be. That was last year. So you come into this year and you look at the players you've got and you say right away, if you get a player that high in the draft, he should be part of your first or second power play unit. We'll talk about it again. That wasn't going to happen this year. And we don't know. There was, that lovely little announcement that they made the trade. It could be, and I'm just guessing, maybe it was Dylan Rubrick saying, I'd rather be somewhere else. When you do those things, we know from last year's experience, it's better to know about those situations, deal with them when you can deal with them on your own terms, than to have bad situations develop in the room and on the ice and it blows up in your face.
Yeah, you don't want that to happen, and they made some trades last year when they didn't feel that the leadership group and the overall, I guess, culture of the locker room wasn't as great as they'd like it to be.
Remember they talked about the Sports Illustrated curse? Or was it the Madden curse? If you ended up on the cover of Madden, bad things happened to you? We have to hope it's not the IceDogs schedule curse. Because if you look at who was on the schedule last year, they're now basically witness protection because they're not here in St. Catharines. And so this year, you're looking at the 3 players that are there, and I don't think they're going to be going anywhere if you look at the new schedules.
News flash for you. Breaking news. Landon Cato, Pano Femus, and Juan Copeland are on the calendar this year, just so you know.
There you go.
So, again, not all 3 players traded, but, again, I feel like Dylan Rubrick, like you mentioned, he could have been a very valuable player for this Ice Dogs team. Plant him in front of the net. You can't move a tree trunk like that if he's as built out as he should be. I think back to a guy like Lawson Krause and how dominant of a power forward he was in the Ontario Hockey League with his days with the Kingston Frontenacs. He would just be a guy that would just stand in front of the net, wreak havoc. Nobody could move him, and he was just a force in front of the net for Kingston. So I really was hoping that Dylan Rubrick would kind of mold into that. But again, just because you're tall doesn't mean that you want to play a physical game. And Dylan Rubrick seems like he wanted to play kind of more of a perimeter game and try to be a shooter.
Question for Coach Daniel Fitzgerald. Are they going to have that kind of power play this year where you have to have a power forward in front of the net at all times? Maybe they're not going to be setting up that kind of power play. Maybe the offense won't run through that kind of situation. I talk as somebody that 5-on-3s drive me crazy because I think sometimes they get too complicated, and sometimes I've sat there, especially in the Ryan Mantha years, and said, okay, crank it from the point and then have everybody go for the rebounds because you got 2 more skaters than they do. And again, not hijacking the thought, but 5-on-3s tend to slow the whole game down, and if you don't score, it can kind of bury you, and you just had 2 guys to your advantage.
One of your greatest almost blunders on the air was shoot the bleeping puck back in the day, but that didn't end up happening. But
yeah, that was in a different situation.
That's kind of what we think of when we think of a 5-on-3 sometimes. Like you said, make it more simple sometimes. So Dylan Rubrick moves on to the Oshawa Generals. And the last trade, at least at the time of recording this episode, William Stewart comes over from the Flint Firebirds for a 12th round pick in 2024. Another American-born player. He's from Pittsburgh. 2005 birth year. He's 6 foot, 180 pounds. William Stewart was a 2021 OHL draft pick by Flint in the 15th round. He spent last year locally with the Pelham Panthers of the GOJHL, netting 16 points in 47 games. He began the season with the Brantford 99ers of the OJHL and picked up a goal in his first 2 games with the team. Ted, I know what some of the fans are going to think out there is, here comes another Brantford 99er player. But again, he was a Flint draft pick, played locally here with Pelham last year in the GOJHL. Do you think he's going to add some depth to this team?
Let's talk about him first of all. What do you know? That's a very good word, because there's some people will use the word, here's what I think. What do you know? What do I know? And the answer to that question is virtually nothing. Was William Stewart drafted in the 15th round because he made it known that the chances of him coming to the OHL were not very good? Did he think, I'm going the NCAA route, those kind of things? Those are some of, the most famous 15th rounder of all time was an IceDogs defenseman. And at the end of a draft, Marty Williamson got bored and said, I don't care anymore. Pick the best player. They got him. No thought he was going to come. And he showed up. And right now I'm drawing a blank. He's one of my all-time favorite players, maybe the best skating IceDogs defenseman of all time, part of another championship team. He was paired up with Vince Dunn all those years. And you see how my mind's going blank.
Blake Siebeneller.
Thank you. 15th round pick. So do we know that? And if we don't know that, do we simply know a situation where, again, Daniel Fitzgerald, Darren DeDobler had a cup of coffee history with William Stewart and knows what's going to go on? Is he the guy that's going to be a depth player? Will he go out and block shots on a power play? Will he stand in front of the goaltender? Will he, sell programs in the stands if you ask him to do it? And right now, that could be one of the biggest challenges for this team. It may not be lines 1 and 2. What's going to happen with lines 3 and 4? And again, you're talking about, as you say, 6'4", 181 pounds. Those numbers say he's only going to pick up more girth as he goes through the kind of training he's going to get with the IceDogs. So we don't know. Those are questions that have to be answered by the general manager, by the coach, and they aren't going to be, done on the internet guessing as to what is going on. Is this player just, a nice thing they're doing, and he's going to end up closer to home here in the junior B level? Don't know. Haven't seen him play.
They move out a player with size and bring in a player with size. So you'd think that maybe right there could possibly be maybe a fourth line winger, and like you mentioned, a guy that could stand in front of the net on the power play and be able to be a good penalty killer. But the IceDogs are definitely not short of willing to make moves, as we saw during the offseason, bringing in 5 different players, with Gaidamak as well not being able to get over to North America yet due to a visa issue. But definitely looks like the IceDogs are willing to wheel and deal, and we'll see if they make more moves coming into the season depending on how the team starts out. But
I'd almost bet on it.
Huh?
I'd almost bet on it.
That we haven't seen the last of the trades.
Because it's such a different team from a year ago. This year it's who's going to play where. Different emphasis on the word last year is who is going to play where, because the team was so young, so inexperienced. We had no idea where any player would slot into different. They've got veteran presence this year, and they could end up coming out of this with assets that they can't use that another team might be able to use in a higher ranking situation where more picks come back as you look forward.
They've definitely restocked the shelves with draft picks with some of the trades that they've been able to make. So we'll take a quick break here. When we'll be back on the other side, we'll discuss the preseason so far through 4 games for the Niagara IceDogs, who's playing well, and kind of get Ted's early thoughts on what kind of the lines might look like. So stay right here on the Dog Pound podcast on the Armchair GM Sports Network. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to segment 2 of today's Dog Pound podcast, the official podcast of your Niagara IceDogs, right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network. As always, I'm your host, Brandon Caputo. You can follow me on Twitter at Caputs13_AGM, and as you can see in the thumbnail of today's episode, joined today by a special fill-in co-host, the radio voice of the Niagara IceDogs on Giant FM Country 89, Ted Lehman. And we just discussed in the first segment, Ted, about some of the acquisitions that the IceDogs have made kind of in the last couple of weeks here. It's been an interesting go at it, but we've also had some preseason matchups 4 games so far for the Niagara IceDogs, and you've been at every single one of them, so I figured there'd be nobody better to ask about how you thought the Niagara IceDogs have played throughout those 4 games. Quickly just going to go over the scores. They had that first game in Kitchener, the 6-2 loss, returning to the odd for the first time since before the pandemic. The fake odd, the real one, is torn down in Buffalo, but we'll get into that another time. They ended up defeating the Windsor Spitfires on the holiday Monday in Port Colborne at the Vail Center. That was an interesting setup there. And then they played a back-to-back home and home. I guess you could say home and home with the Erie Otters.
Home and home.
With the game being in the Virgil Arena for the return of the Erie Otters, as they were once here in Niagara before moving to Erie. The IceDogs won that game 7-2 in front of a raucous crowd, where Ted was standing on top of a chair having to call that game, and I stood for 1 period, and that was enough for me. And then they lost 4-3 to the Erie Otters the night after at the Meridian Center of a controversial goal that I think would have been reviewed in the regular season game, where Josh Rosenzweig got ran into with 10 seconds left, giving Erie the win. So, Ted, what have been your general thoughts on how the IceDogs have started out their preseason? Still 2 more games to go against the OHL champion Hamilton Bulldogs next Tuesday and Thursday, but just general thoughts so far on the 4 of the 6 games throughout the preseason.
Well, if you look at it from a sport-to-sport situation, they always say in baseball, defense is ahead of the offense when the early games are played, because the pitchers get all the work in, and it's easier to field the ball than hit it. If you translate that to hockey, the second hardest thing to get focused and get perfect is defense. The first hardest thing to get under control is team defense. And the 4 games so far have been massive proof of exactly that fact. The IceDogs don't look like they're going to have any problem. And again, they're mixing and matching, and they've had players in and out of the lineup for different reasons. I don't think they're going to have any problems with offense. I'm not looking at a 2012 juggernaut or anything like that. It's going to be much improved over last year, but it's that 5 men all on the same mental page in front of the goaltender situation when you make this many changes, as has happened through the preseason and even before the exhibition schedule got underway. You're still running into situations where centerman and winger are going, "Hi, my name is, good to meet you, here we go." And that has been what's been proven out probably the most through the first 4 games of 6.
Yeah, I feel like some of these guys need a name tag, especially at training camp. "Hello, my name is," because even for us, having to learn these guys' names, put names to faces, has been difficult. So I'm sure for the players it's been the same way, and you have to go out and play with some of these guys, and you don't even really know who they are yet. So far, I'm going to say the IceDogs have a 2-1-1 record in the preseason, because I think that goal against Erie, that goal that Erie scored, most likely would have been called back, and we would have seen at least an overtime for that game. So, in my mind, the IceDogs are 2-1-1 here in the preseason, and they put up a decent goal total so far, Ted. I mean, like you said, they're not short of offense so far. Again, playing against some teams that have been missing some players, but that's what you see throughout the preseason. Other than that game in Kitchener, they've played fairly well.
Well, and even the game in Kitchener was a great example of what I was talking about before. Both teams played on crappy ice. It worked out better for Kitchener. I mean, there were situations where Joey Costanzo had a 2-on-0 within about 7 feet of his net, simply because a puck hit a rut, bounced over somebody. There you go. And the other thing about the first game, and I asked Coach Daniel Fitzgerald about this before game number 2, found a nice way of saying it. They wanted aggressive. They want puck possession. They wanted aggressive. If you remember Kitchener, there were players flying at Kitchener players trying to take them out. They were trying to get mid-season hits in the first game, and in some cases, they ended up out of position. And it was Coach and GM Marty Williamson years ago. I mean, one of the things we abandoned on the broadcast was a hit of the game, because the speed and the size of these players simply doesn't happen to end the rules. Because if you succeed, you might get a league-mandated holiday of 5, 10, or more games. So it's become a game of positioning as opposed to that kind of physicality. That hurt them in the first game, and that was kind of the difference. They came out against Windsor at the Valet Center, and boom, blew the doors off them early, and then saw Windsor make the comeback, and then closed it out the way you'd like them to. That was a game where Windsor didn't have as many of their regular season bodies in the lineup. Probably the game that showed the most, with no Pasquale Zito, was the game in Virgil. First of all, the way Owen Flores played in net. they had 4 defensemen. And that was amazing to see what they were able to accomplish. A 5th defenseman for the next game against Erie was a luxury for the head coach. And then all of a sudden, the Ice Dogs, and nobody really cares that they're 2-1-1 in reality because you're trying to figure out exactly what's going to be going on with this team. And so far, there's been nice building. Take your one hand and count the number of games the Ice Dogs outshot a team last year.
Not many.
It's the preseason. They've been regularly outshooting teams in the preseason. I'm going to ask Daniel Fitzgerald that question. Puck possession? Yeah, I know they want that. Physicality? I know they want that. But again, I think shots on goal has been one of the focuses for the team this year. Mission accomplished in the preseason.
18 goals for in those 4 games, and how many times did we see last year either Rosenzweig or Costanzo facing 50 shots a game? It was almost on a regularity where they would either make miraculous saves that would get them on the OHL save of the night, which the Ice Dogs had the most of last year, just for the sheer volume of the fact that they were getting outshot, peppered by teams for most of the year, and gave Costanzo and Rosenzweig definitely some good practice in the net. But like you mentioned, I think the offense and the puck possession is something that maybe the Ice Dogs are looking at this year and saying we're going to change that from what we saw last year with this team. And there wasn't many games where they were out shooting teams. So I think there's been progress so far with what we've seen in the preseason. And getting into specific players, I mean, how about Matthew Pappas coming over from the Guelph Storm in an offseason trade? 8 points in the 4 games, 5 goals. Ted, can't ask for much more from a guy coming over from the Guelph Storm you thought could possibly contend for a top 6 role, but it looks like definitely right now he's going to be playing in the top 6 and being one of the key contributors of the offense.
Well, he's more than a top 6 contributor right now, and he looked like a heart and soul kind of player with his numbers with the Guelph Storm. Again, there was some history with the coach and the general manager with Matthew Pappas. Could have been his numbers were the way they were because of the role that was given to him in Guelph. And again, when the brain trust of your team knows there's something more in the tank on the player they're acquiring, good things are going to happen there. But I'll start the debate. I think through the first 4 games of the preseason, clearly and without question, that's how you get debates going, the best player has been Rodwin Denizio. And he's done it in some of the scariest fashions I've ever seen, because I've seen Ice Dogs defensemen. I've seen Vince Dunn, Blake Siebenoller, and I've seen them stick handle out of a phone booth of trouble, and it always amazed me. Rodwin Denizio, last year, he got himself into some pickles by trying to do that. This year, in close quarters, he's been undressing people, and he just uses his puck handling skills to get out of the worst situations possible. The coach is happy with it because I found a nice way of asking a question. And really the question, if I wasn't coaching it, was, are you scared to death sometimes when he picks up the puck and he's going to move it through with 3 or 4 bodies? And he went, no, I got no problem with that. We know what he's capable of doing, and we know what the World Junior experience did for him. His year last year in the OHL did for him. And now being, the quarterback of the top power play, the ceiling is unlimited for Rodwin Denizio.
And hopefully the bakery will be closed for Rodwin Denizio because he was serving up some turnovers last year at times.
Who wasn't?
Everybody was.
Who wasn't? I mean, it was a tough situation for the team last year. I mean, and Landon Cato would probably be the first one to talk about that, as solid as his season was. And that's what they're all, I'm sure, going to be looking forward between Daniel Fitzgerald, the D coach, and everything they're going to be doing. They have to, with puck possession, limit the number of turnovers they're going to have.
And I don't think anybody was a plus on this team last year. So that goes to show you just, plus minus can sometimes be a skewed kind of statistic because you look at great teams and, maybe the defensive defenseman that ends up playing with somebody like Cale Makar or somebody at the level of that ends up becoming the beneficiary of, a plus 30 or 40 on the year. And I think that stat, you can kind of throw that out the window sometimes. It just basically is a team stat at how well the team is playing.
Now that I've talked about Rodwin Denizio and get the debate going as the best player in the preseason, I'll give you a name for the biggest surprise so far in the preseason, and that's Anthony Augustinelli. As physically as he has played, using his size to his advantage, and opened up some eyes. And somebody that can be that character player who may not get the girl if they were casting the movie, but he'll be the one that'll be, riding shotgun with the guy who ends up getting the 50 goals. Agustinelli has really done a lot for himself so far in the preseason.
A good Western New York boy as well, so I got to throw that in there. But, Anthony Agustinelli, we didn't know if he was going to be on this team this year. We were wondering kind of where the cut line was and if Anthony was going to be able to make it through, but he's had the good experiences with this team and been through the ups and downs along with Landon Cato throughout these years and throughout the COVID pandemic with this team and what's gone on. So, Anthony, he got suspended for that fight he had in Kitchener, and then he was ill for a little bit, not COVID related, but he was under the weather, kind of like I'm sounding right now, as you can probably tell in my voice. But Anthony Agustinelli is a trooper. He's fighting through it, and he's going to be a valuable bottom six forward on this team if they're able to kind of compete. And you mentioned earlier the top six. You know what you could probably expect from them. It's going to be the bottom six that's going to need to come through. You're going to need to have that continual scoring throughout the lineup that we've seen some of the great teams do. The best example is Hamilton last year. Look at how deep they were from lines 1 to 4. Any line could score at any time that they were on the ice. So I think the IceDogs are trying to build that, and Anthony Agustinelli would most likely be one of those key contributors. But for me, what I've seen as far as the biggest improvement from what we saw last year, just by seeing him in training camp and now in the preseason, Robin Denisio is a good choice. I think that he's definitely improved, and that's the experience he had with Team Switzerland at the World Juniors was definitely key for him. But I'm going to go to another defenseman. I'm going to go with Andrew Wysick, because Andrew Wysick last year was thrown into some situations. He was up in the press box at the beginning of the year when the IceDogs felt like they had an entourage of players sitting up in the press box with the amount of injuries and COVID illnesses that they had. But Andrew Wysick last year seemed like he was a little bit tentative with the puck, didn't really want to have the puck on his stick, seemed like he was, a little wide-eyed at times out there. But this year he looks more confident, he looks faster. You can see that he's worked on his skating throughout the offseason, and he's willing to carry the puck in the zone, and he wants the puck this year. And I think that's the big thing for these IceDogs returning defensemen. They want to have the puck on their stick, they're not worried about it, and they're wanting to make a difference on the offensive side of the game.
Well, I think one of the things he's benefited from, and I can disagree, I was really a Wysick fan last year as I was an Alec Leonard fan, and potentially as you and I played coach and GM, they might be a pairing on this team, Wysick and Leonard, and Wysick may have benefited from watching Leonard last year. Leonard was less intimidated by situations. Both of them benefited by being thrown into the fire, by being in the situations they had no business being in, and I think it helped them out a lot. And it makes for 3 fun pairings if you want to jump into that. Shutdown pairing, you got it. Cato and Jesus. Done. Denisio all over the ice. Nathan Rebo doing his best Dallas Smith, the Bobby Orr impression, being there and, chipping in and doing his thing he has to do. And then the 2 young guns with even more depth coming up on defense with the moves that have been played. That's pretty good top 6 defensemen as you get into it. And if you look at the line combinations, it looks so far like we're going to end up in a situation where you're going to be looking at Panofimas playing with Nolan Dan and probably Aiden Castle, 2/3 of the line that came to the IceDogs. And then you end up in a second line situation where suddenly you got Pasquale Zito going out there with Brendan Cirizzotti, Matthew Pappas. Stop me if you've heard anything that really upsets you so far, because you're looking at a third line that's going to feature the likes of a Bryce Cook is going to be out there, and veteran experience in Daniel Michaud. And then the battle goes, who's going to be the right winger in that line situation? However that shakes out, suddenly we just talked about 3 pretty solid pairings, pretty solid lines, and it plows the way for the fourth line, not to be, we hope we get on the ice, but the fourth line that goes, we're going to just bust it, and we'll probably take advantage of the fact that those 3 lines have probably tired out the team on the other side.
Absolutely, and you've seen the production so far already, even in the preseason. Brendan Cirizzotti, guy they got from the Ottawa 67s last year, and you've always thought that Cirizzotti has the potential to really be a breakout player. It just seems like the consistency level for him is something that needed to change.
If the preseason is any indication, one of the things they've done with Brendan Cirizzotti is give him a little bit more responsibility. There's no way Brendan Cirizzotti took penalty kill time last year. It just was not his forte, not what he was going to do. And everybody's talked about, he's got the shot. has to hit the net on a more regular basis, and that's more important sometimes to hit the net in the right place. One of the plays I never see enough is an odd man rush down the ice where the winger has the puck, and he shoots it with the sole intention of hitting that middle pad. So one or two teammates are going to go in and get a piece of garbage and be able to bury it. Too many times they hit him in the crest, and that applies to every OHL team. Or they go short side and the goalie's able to fend it off. Those are the kind of things we're going to need to see going forward for any team to be successful. IceDogs are in a unique situation. Right-handed defensemen are the holy grail. It's like a goal. You know, you go to the NHL level, right-handed defensemen are the minority. IceDogs have a majority of right-handed defensemen.
They're a premium.
Right. But the other problem they've got is a short-handed, a short situation of right shot, right wingers. So you could see potentially two left-handed shots having to play the right side for Daniel Fitzgerald in that top 9 situation. And as we say, that fourth line could be having more fun. And there's been a good impression so far of Kevin He and what he's done. And in the situation where they were playing in Virgil and the game was well in hand, sending out 2 rookies in Vermeulen and Kevin He to go out and kill a penalty, you know, it's just, hey, new experience. Probably did it the level before here, but now they're doing it at the OHL level. And, you know, there's a lot of upside so far for, you know, especially for Kevin He coming to the IceDogs.
Looks like it's going to be most likely 2 or 3 rookies that are going to be battling for spots on this roster, if not, you know, going to be an extra forward on this lineup. But Kevin He definitely has had flashes so far.
Oh, and I feel for the rookies, because rookies load the bus. Last year there was 14 guys loading the bus. This year there could be 2 or 3. That'll be the biggest change, getting the 40-footer loaded for any road trip.
Matthew Pappas, 8 points in 4 games. Sirazati, 7 in 4 games. And then you have Panofemus, David Jesus, Nolan Dan, Rodwin Denicio, and Daniel Michaud, not to be mistaken with Mycod, all with 4 points in those 4 games so far. So the IceDogs have had that scoring throughout that we've said is going to be a key for them if they want to be that playoff team once again, having that depth scoring. Pasquale Zito's only played 2 games. Aiden Castle's only played 2 games. Those are 2 of the guys in the top 6 that you would expect during the season. But let's quickly touch on the IceDog players that are going away to NHL training camps and or prospect tournaments. Pasquale Zito, Panofemus, Aiden Castle. Those 3 guys are going to be gone at least for these 2 games coming up against the OHL champion Hamilton Bulldogs. Ted, what do you think that the IceDogs will be able to do, and who do you think might be able to step up in their absence?
We haven't mentioned Juan Copeland the whole time we're talking, and he had a good rookie season, but one of the things that can happen with all the changes, you have to find your way. One of the things that's happening for you and me. We are learning, getting to know, and getting comfortable really quick with a brand new organization that just happens to be in St. Catharines. You've got a situation where these players might have been playing top 6 last year, and now they're fighting not to be 4th-line players. So Juan Copeland's going to benefit in the next little bit. He's played on the wing. He's played at center in the preseason. Where he finally slots in, only people smarter than me will know. So it'll be fun to see those people get those opportunities. And again, you know, you look forward to seeing what's going to happen. Vermeulen, Kevin He, do they kind of bump up in these 2 games against the Hamilton Bulldogs and see what they can do? Kevin He's a big right-handed shot. Get him out there. Maybe he finds himself, you know, in a line combination he wouldn't normally see when the season begins, just as an audition for not only this year, but for next year.
And on the back end, it's interesting because they've had 2 key injuries already in the preseason with Landon Cato and Nathan Rebo both going out. Haven't really gotten any confirmation on if either of those guys will be back this week or be back for the start of the regular season. But they've went shorthanded. They've had the extra forwards playing at times throughout, and I don't think they've had 6 defensemen since that second game against the Windsor Spitfires.
But what's the benefit? Ryan Van Netten, who looked really... I'm new in the OHL in the early going in the preseason. In the last couple of encounters, looked like he's meant to be there. More depth on the back end, more ability, whether it's to make the team better now or make the team better in the future. And again, people keep making the comment: experience through the Brantford 99ers organization, those in charge know the young guy. He comes into a brand new environment. And again, it's not the regular season. Before you make all the comments and your Twitter goes crazy going, yeah, it's preseason. I know it's preseason, but it's preseason for the other teams too. And if you can compete at the level you're looking at now, logic says you're only going to improve as you go through and as teams, players get bigger and stronger. He's got a couple of points. Most of them he's been able to achieve just by doing his job. He hasn't stepped out of his comfort zone. We talked about Wysick and Leonard jumping in right now. That doesn't seem to be Van Netten's kind of game, and that's fine because we said before, for every Bobby Orr, you better have a Dallas Smith back there to make sure at least one defenseman's where he needs to be.
And he's technically not a rookie because he played a few games last year. And it's interesting because you'd think that he was a rookie coming in, but 2 points in 4 games. I'm going to say this as a compliment. I haven't noticed him much, but as a defenseman, and especially as a defenseman that's going to be reliable in his own zone, I think that's a good thing because that means that he's not been out of position. He hasn't been missing assignments. He's been playing a smart game. Like you mentioned, for every Bobby Orr, there needs to be that defensive defenseman. Erik Karlsson in his Norris Trophy year needed Mark Mathot with him to be able to be successful.
Every IceDogs defenseman has been out of position at least once in the preseason, and all for the same reason, because they're trying to impress and they tried to take somebody's head off. And it gets them where they're not supposed to be. And in some cases, it's happened in odd man rush situations, which makes it even worse. Welcome to the preseason. The biggest thing, too, we talked about team defense, or I said team defense being the last thing to gel on any team, this or any other team. You're seeing the fact that, Brendan Sirizotti is now, with experience, more responsible in his own end. We forget one thing. He went through injuries, but he was also thrust into a challenging situation, Pano-Fimis. Akil Thomas never played center in his rookie year, because the word was coming, after being drafted in the first round and coming in here, they thought he would potentially get killed if he found himself in a situation down low, battling some of these bigger bodies. So his rookie year was spent on the wing. Pano-Fimis not only lost a rookie year, which he did courtesy of the pandemic, he lost that year where he got to maybe figure out the league without having to go into one of the highest profile positions possible. When he came back from injury, and I think he played a lot of time last year hurt, he was as good as people expected him to be. And I've gotten such a laugh out of people who said, hey, a second overall pick who didn't get drafted into the NHL. Something wrong there. Well, I hate to tell you, there were a lot of high draft picks that came out of 2020. There was that glut. It's not an accident that most of the NHL selections were Europeans. Why? They kept playing. And some of the younger players here in North America didn't, and they lost a whole year of experience. So look out, the upside for a Pano-Fimis again. I think it's limitless.
Missed an entire season, like you mentioned, and he came back, and he's looked focused as ever. I think that experience he had at the NHL draft is actually going to help him because he seems more motivated, and he's got that chip on his shoulder. He's got that swagger that he wants to come in and be a key contributor for this team. And the season that he had last year was not an easy situation to come into, like you mentioned. And now he's away at the Leafs camp. So that's giving him some confidence as well. So I think, like you said, big things from Pano-Fimis moving forward into 2022-23. But before we wrap up today, Ted, 2 more games upcoming for the preseason against the Hamilton Bulldogs, the champion OHL Bulldogs. I just mentioned their Twitter handle instead of their actual team name, but that's the life of Twitter. What are you looking for, and maybe is there a player that you're looking to step up? Like we mentioned Juan Copeland with Castle, Fimis, and Zito all being out of the lineup. What are you really looking for in these 2 games against the champion and kind of the benchmark of where you want to be at when the regular season starts?
I don't know how they do this, but I want more comfort from Daniel Michaud. I want him to have a comfort for who's going to be with him and what he's going to be doing. I'd like to see more out of that. I would love it if injured defensemen got back and got their feet under them in the next couple of games. I'd like to see the goaltending stay as solid as it was in the victory in the Virgil Arena, as it was, for most of the game at the Valley Center against the Windsor Spitfires. I'd like to see whoever plays the 2 games, and I believe Daniel Fitzgerald is going to be true to his word, and goaltenders are going to get full games. So it wouldn't surprise me if we don't see Josh Rosenzweig in either of these 2 games, and we see Joey Costanzo, and we happen to see Owen Flores, and I'd love to see what they're going to be able to do. Bulldogs are going to be an enigma this year because they lost so much, but they still have some names there, and once again, they've got chips to work with where they can rebuild. Off their last championship, they rebuilt in a hurry. So to Steve Stais, hats off for what he's been able to accomplish. He's going to be looking around at what teams are going to be looking for the pieces on his side. I want to see Anthony Agustinelli continue with what he's been doing in the next couple of games. We talked about Wysick and Leonard. I want to see them continue to have the confidence to play in this end and in that end as well. So it's just a matter, I think, if you're Daniel Fitzgerald. I ran into him this past week in the IceDogs office, and I laughed and I said, "How's your week off?" And he went, "Yeah, week off." And I'm thinking, yeah, there's a lot that had to be worked on. And he admitted that in terms of what he's trying to do to get the team ready for the regular season. The impression so far, I want to see what I've seen so far from the coaching staff, which is a coaching staff that to me has not acted like a rookie coaching staff. They could easily be very wide-eyed themselves as they come into their first OHL season. There seems to be a plan, and there seems to be an idea of how to get there, and it seems to be that everybody behind the bench is on the same page.
It's definitely going to be an interesting end to the preseason, and seeing what the final lineup is going to look like come September 29th, the home opener against the Mississauga Steelheads, and then we will go on the road for the Michigan trip, that long-awaited return of the Michigan road trip. Flint and Saginaw should be interesting, Ted, and I look forward to joining you for that as well.
Two of the best media rooms in the league.
Can't wait for it. So
starve yourself.
A big thank you to Ted Lehman for joining us today as the guest fill-in co-host, as my regular co-host Kyle Aikett is still under the weather. We wish him well in his recovery. Luckily, it's still preseason, and I'm still in preseason form, as you can tell by my voice as well. But Ted, voice of the Niagara IceDogs on Giant FM Country 89, thanks so much for doing this today.
Kyle, don't be aching it.
Love that. Well, folks, that's going to wrap it up for today's installment of the Dog Pound Podcast, the official podcast of your Niagara IceDogs, your source North American sports coverage delivered to you right here in the Niagara region. Make sure to stay up to date with all our IceDogs content by checking out our social medias, especially at Dog Pound Podcast on Twitter and TikTok, and our Armchair GM's a YouTube channel. For all things regarding the network, find us on our website at armchairgmsports.com. And a big thank you to all of our viewers and our listeners out there, IceDog fans, for tuning in and listening along for another episode. For my co-host Kyle Aikett, my name is Brandon Caputo, signing off once again for another successful episode of the Dog Pound Podcast right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network. As always, bark, 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 go Dogs, go. We'll talk to you guys again very soon.